Sairam, brothers and sisters, good morning. And with pranams at Bhagwan's lotus feet, uh, I offer myself and take Bhagwan's permission to talk about a topic that is very dear to Swami's own heart. And as you know, uh, Swami had a great uh, uh, ability to bring back those beautiful encounters, beautiful memories of his previous avatars. And he often narrated incidents that have not been recorded or have not been recorded in that much detail. Plus, he often narrated to us the, the value of each of those incidents and what we can take away from those incidents, because more than the fact that we should recollect the incident itself is the fact that we should really take away the learnings and the opportunities for self growth and spiritual growth. So with that, I want to give you a little bit of background about how Swami you know did couple of great efforts where he provided input on the Gita Vahini and on the Gita itself. And uh, you know, in 1984, I happened to be a student in my 12th grade in Parthi, and at that time, Swami, there was a lot of violence happening in the Anantapur area. You know, Puttaparthi was a small village, no more a small village. But in the Anantapur area, which is the district or the county as it is called here, there was a lot of violence. And uh, some of these things have, are etched in your memory just because of the context and the background. And Swami, on August 2nd, 1984, suddenly announced that he would start the series of where he would expand and describe and elaborate on Sri Krishna's teachings and focus on the Bhagavad Gita. So from August 2nd, 1984 until I think middle of September 1984 is when we had every single day in the evenings uh, a discourse by Swami. And there are these memories, but it helps us to contextualize the situation. So most of you would have seen Swami speak in the Kulwant Hall. Of course, at that time there was no Kulwant Hall, and even these discourses happened in the Bhajan Hall itself. So for those of you who have been inside the Prashanti Nilayam Bhajan Hall, you will see that it's probably a space that can hold about, I would guess, close to 350 to 400 people maximum. And on the ladies' side of the Bhajan Hall, it opens to the outside. There is a veranda, and on the gents side also there are windows, and it opens to the veranda where the boys sit, the students used to sit, and where Bhagwan Samadhi is today. But just for context, the Bhajan Mandir is a very, very special place. It has been the witness to so many different interactions. You may not know this, but whenever there was a program, if the band boys or the Vedam boys were going to perform that day, they would go into the bhajan hall, and Swami would come out from the interview room. Until 1993, Swami stayed in the Prashanti Mandir. He had the interview room downstairs, and above that was his own bedroom. And beside the interview room was Swami's dining room, where guests would dine with Swami and Swami would take his meals. And then this side of the interview room was the Bhajan Mandir, where these lecture series actually happened. And as you know, in the Bhajan Mandir, on the side where Swami's chair is, there's a very beautiful and elaborate altar. where every day worship was offered and is still offered. And what I wanted to point you to, at the opposite end of the Bhajan Mandir, for some reason, for as long as I was there in Prashanti Nilayam, and I know it is still there today, there is a fairly big platform, maybe 15 feet by probably 6 or 7 feet, where there is a massive chariot and Arjuna sitting in the chariot, and uh, Lord Krishna as a charioteer, in that chariot. So it is fascinating to see that in that small space of the Bhajan Mandir, Swami had that chariot with Lord Krishna's life-size statue and Arjuna's life-size statue, with all the trappings of war, the bow and arrow and everything. So to me, it always struck me that on the one side was the altar with Swami and Shirdi Baba, the other side. So we as students sat in that bhajan mandir and sang with the backdrop of Arjuna and Sri Krishna, and with the worship being offered to the current forms of the avatar, which is Lord Sai and Lord Sai of Shirdi and Parthi. So it's beautiful because this is where we live. This is where our heart is. So these context pieces of context can take us into that pure setting. See, what is the value of remembering those settings? Those settings are pure. Those settings are not they are not settings where we have anything to gain monetarily or career wise. Those are settings where our heart can soar. Those are inspirational settings. And because the divine touch, the divine life has blessed and graced those places, uh, uh, just connecting with those places can make our mind soar. So, and I also want to point you to the visual that I'm showing you now, where Swami is sitting and allowed himself to be photographed along with this picture of Lord Shri Krishna. So, let's move into our topic. We have some good content to cover. So, in the Bhaja Govindam, Sri Shankaracharya has said very beautifully, the Bhaja Govindam verses are very beautiful. They are very thought provoking, they are musical, they are very poetical and rhyming. So, Lord Shankaracharya says, Bhagavad Gita Kinchid Dita, Ganga Jalalav Kanika Pita, Sahadrapi Yena Murari Samarcha, Kriyate Tasya Yamena Na Charcha. So, it's not like I want to bog you down in Sanskrit, but Sanskrit has its own value. Sanskrit has its own rhythm, and Sanskrit is the language of the gods. So bear with me as we, go through some of that, because again, to remind you, the Gita was all captured in this beautiful language, Sanskrit. So this is probably a prelude to that. So this verse of Lord Shankaracharya, which is part of the famous text called Bhaja Govindam, which literally means chant the name of Govinda. And that's why it is relevant here, because it is Lord Govinda or Sri Krishna who imparted the Gita to Arjuna. This verse says, if one reads a little bit of the Bhagavad Gita, drinks but a drop from the Ganga, or worships Murari, Murari is another name of Lord Krishna, even for a fraction of a moment, he won't have any difficulty with Yama. All of you know who Yama is. Yama is the climax of every human, animal, and plant life. Whatever we live and do, perform, conduct ourselves, achieve, or while away the time, irrespective, a moment is going to come where life is followed by the culmination of life, which to the unintroduced seems like a distasteful moment, a moment to be avoided. But, and it is a troublesome moment. It is a moment which requires us to transcend. But at that time, when you need to transcend, what is it that can help you? Can our friends, can our property and assets, can our degrees and qualifications, will our family members come of help at that time? And this is a very good thought. It's not something to be run away from. In fact, you will not believe, brothers and sisters, Swami, even when he spoke to us students who were gathered in front of him, we were between the grades of 8th grade and PhD. Swami often spoke about the fact that death is inevitable. It was not to it was not to create fear in our hearts, and he did not expand on it too much, but it was to introduce the idea that uh, do not have fear for death, but rather prepare for it. Life is a long opportunity, many sets of events, learnings, inputs, where you're building up your equipment. And Shankara, Lord Shankara over here brings out the same beautiful idea that the 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 reading of the Bhagavad Gita, that getting our mind connected with such a pure text and trying to assimilate, sincerely trying to assimilate even a drop of the Ganga, which stands, all these are equated, all these are considered equal. Worship of Murari, a verse of the Gita or a teaching from the Gita, or a drop of the Ganga. Now let's go a little bit further and see how Swami, uh, you know, has spoken about the potency of the Gita. If you can see the image on the right, there are two things there. Above the image, you will see Swami. This is Swami's own statement. Swami had this beautiful ability of playing with words. As most of you know, Swami dropped out of school, chose to drop out of school in the 7th grade. And constantly, he gave us glimpses of his ability to play with language, which is just one more kala or aspect of the avatar, and see how simply he puts it. He says, when he talks about the Gita later on in the Gita Vahini, he says, promote goodness, not goodsness. So life today is all about goods. When you cannot buy those goods in a retail shop yourself, you cannot today go, of course, people are still going a little bit to the Targets, Kohls and Walmarts of the world. But if you can't go yourself, you try to use Amazon or eBay to buy your goods, right? So life has become all about goods. And of course, some of those goods are necessary, but Swami is talking about goodness, not goodsness. And it's beautiful to see and appreciate how he plays with the simple words that are a, a direct way to our heart. More importantly, you can see what Swami is doing in that image. He is lighting up a diya or a jyoti or a little flame. And this flame is always lit in the Indian tradition to begin any activity. Most activities had Swami being invited to light up a flame. In this case, Swami is himself striking the matchstick and lighting up the wicks on multiple sides of that object. But what is the significance? That's all very nice to see, and we love to see Swami's images. But Swami said, and you can see it over here, this is what Swami often said to us when he would come out of the interview room after giving interviews to the devotees. That's when an air of expectation would build up amongst us students. We had come from college, so when we would land up in the mandir, very often Swami had already finished his darshan round and he would be in the interview room. But when he would come out of the interview room, two things would happen. One is uh, his gown, his robe would be pretty much uh, drenched in sweat. And that's the time he would crack many jokes. For instance, when he took the Mumbai people into the interview room, he would come out after, say, 2 hours or so, closeted with them in that uh, uh, tight space of the interview room. And then he would say, his back, the back of his robe would be all drenched. And, right inside the bhajan hall, behind the door, was a fan, a pedestal fan. And Swami would rush and hide behind that door literally. And he would stand behind it, and some of the boys would vie for this chance to go behind and aim the fan, the pedestal fan, on Swami's back so that he could dry out his literally a drenched back of the robe. And then he would come out to the students, and I remember distinctly him saying, Mumbai Vasana. This is all the qualities of Mumbai, which Swami would often, liken to New York. Says, and he would hold his nose like this, which only meant to say that he had cleaned up all the devotees whom he had spoken to and sucked out their, uh, you know, uh, negative inclinations as they came from those cities. And then he would stand in front of us. I mean, he would talk about many different topics. Sometimes he would talk about Sri Ramakrishna Paramahamsa and how Vivekananda represented Sri Ramakrishna Paramahamsa. And at that moment, I remember Swami saying, uh, Vivekananda was one great disciple of Sri Ramakrishna. And I've heard this from my own experience. I was there when Swami said it. And he said, I will have many Vivekanandas. And then he said, to light a forest fire, you need only one matchstick. You don't need box loads or truckloads of matchsticks or lighters. With one matchstick, you can set the fire in the forest ablaze. What does that mean? And when you liken it to the context we are discussing, the Gita, very often we make all our spiritual efforts too much conceptual. And because we use a lot of analytical tendency at work, we tend to bring the same analytical ability into spirituality. And to some extent, it is natural and helpful also when we want to compile information on a theme like I have done here. But we got to be aware that spirituality is not about collecting ideas. Then it would be nothing but what Swami called goodsness. We would fill up our computers and our brains and our minds with more verses, with more information, maybe with more meanings, but that's not the point. And that is the difference between collecting more and more ideas and taking one idea and running with it. Run with that idea. Take one idea from the Gita that you like, that appeals to you, and then close the book and then say, this idea is going to be my guiding light for the next period. And I'm going to try to work on that. I'm going to try to find the true meaning. And what is the true meaning? Again, the true meaning of that verse that you like is not going to be understanding it better and more clearer. It would be an opportunity wasted. The true meaning of that verse of the Gita would be when you feel the inspiration to act. It's not the inspiration to verbalize, think, and argue. It's the inspiration to act. The Gita is nothing but a clarion call for action. And as you can see, all of you know how strange it is. And Swami, brought these images out to us. He didn't let us sit there and just, while away the time. So Swami said, how funny that all those decades, Krishna and Arjuna were cousins. And Swami has himself said this so beautifully. They were such close buddies, such close friends. There was a lot of respect Arjuna had for Sri Krishna, but they were very, very close. They, Swami said, very often after practicing archery or different types of, at that time, the ability, the skill to use the mace, the bow and arrow, and the spear were major skills the princes had to learn. And Swami said, after that, when they rested, they would talk for hours. And then, when they rested their bodies, Krishna would put his head, the divine head, on Arjuna's thigh and take rest. And at other times, when Arjuna was resting, Arjuna would rest on Sri Krishna. That was the proximity that they had. And these stories are sweet, but they also tell us something very important, which we try to discover now. It is only at the time of this Mahayuddh, or tremendous battle, literally, which it was, right? It was a battle of epic proportion. I mean, probably the thing that will come to mind is a huge battle between large kingdoms. And this was a battle between families. This was a battle that tore alliances apart. This was a battle between close friends where they had to make a choice. And it is at such a moment that Lord Sri Krishna, in his divine omniscience, he knows everything. He came with that purpose. And one of the biggest objectives of the avatar that he took was to give the Gita. But he gave it to one person. Swami has given discourses. Somebody has counted the number of public discourses, 6,000 discourses. But those have been in public. Of course, there have been different audiences at different times. But Sri Krishna chose to give such a huge, high impact, very, very abstract scripture to just one person. So you can try to imagine the deservedness of Arjuna and the timing of the whole thing. And Swami said, in the same way, you have to watch out for when the teachings come in front of you. So for us, we got those teachings from Swami like that when he stood before us in the portico, on the veranda of Prashanti Nilayam, or sometimes when he would roll down the window of his car and say something to us. So we have to be aware, and that Sai Tattva is still active. He's communicating with us. So at the time, what was the time of war for Arjuna? That was the time when he was torn, he was depressed. And that is the time when Lord Krishna reserved all his teaching and his guidance to give it to Arjuna at the time when he needed it most. So when did Swami write out the Gita Vahini? You can see that here. That's another piece of very interesting detail. You can see how Swami kept himself so busy. It's amazing that Swami chose to actually write the Gita Vahini, which is a fantastic text. And I am grateful to the Bridgewater Sai Center, where I had to speak last year on the Gita Vahini, because of which I read for the second or third time the entire Gita Vahini. It is also available online. You can download it. It's a small PDF. But just go back and appreciate our Sai while he was touring the length and breadth of Andhra Pradesh. Very hectic tour. And brothers and sisters, more than anything else, let's try to feel that love for our Sai. You may not know, but in the later years, Swami often complained of pain in the knees. And even in the late 60s, after such tours, Swami would walk into a devotee's house and after these tours and says, "Chala noppiga undi. I'm having a lot of pain in the knees." So what I'm trying to share with you is, let's think of how the divine embodied in the physical, he took up the hundreds and hundreds of limitations that a human body has. Don't just think, oh, this is God and what is there for him? He has no worries, he has no problems. Swami showed us that he navigated all the challenges in his own body with the people he interacted with, and in groups that he worked with organizations that he worked with, and still he came out on top. And that coming out on top was not any achievement for him, but it was an achievement of people transformed, of people inspired, of people elevated. So I want us, and myself included, to think of that how Swami would say after those trips, and do you know why he had that knee pain? Because Swami only could travel in a ambassador car, and you will not believe it if you read Satyam Shivam Sundaram. There would be 5 or 4 or 6 people in the car, and Swami had to sit because the person who was going to host Swami, the person who was going to introduce Swami, so on and so forth. A lot of reasons were there. But those ambassador cars, all of you know how an ambassador car is in India, and there is a picture of Swami sitting on the bonnet of the ambassador car. So why did Swami get that knee pain and all that? Because he was sitting crushed up in the back of the ambassador car, going from place to place. And the other reason he got that knee pain was that no sooner than he had gone like 30 miles, 40 miles, just sitting all bunched up there, he would have to get down because there were groups of devotees waiting, singing, sitting in the rain, sitting in the heat, and Swami's heart would melt and he would get down. They would say, "No, Swami, we have to reach so and so place. We can't make it on time." So he said, "1 minute, give me 1 minute." And he would get down from the car, and then he would stand. Then somebody would give letters, somebody would weep and fall at his feet, and so on and so forth. And then that would become another big event for Swami. And then he would have to extricate himself, come back into the car, and then drive another 30 kilometers or miles. And then there would be a public discourse he had to deliver there. And it's in the midst of this type of very hectic, very difficult on the body trip that he undertook that he wrote the Gita Vahini for us. So that should take us back to what Swami's life was all about and how it is a direct uh, example or illustration. Swami often says, my life is not pradarshana. He wore the same color robe, except when we begged him. Some Gokulashtamis, he stopped coming out in yellow robe. Then the students would beg him, Swami, please, you're not wearing the yellow robe. We want to see you in the yellow robe. He said, I have stopped all that. And then that Gokulashtami, to please us, he would. So he is the most ascetic person. His life embodied tremendous asceticism. I've seen his bedroom, and Swami used to say, I'm a prisoner. I cannot walk. In the early years, when he would visit Kodaikanal, he would make 2 rounds around the lake, which is a 45-minute walk. And he said, now I can't do that. If I even show my face, 500 people will gather. So I walk in that tiny room up and down after dinner to get some exercise. So these physical, it's not physical. Bringing Swami into our consciousnesses in any way is inspirational and elevating. So at that time, when Swami lived such a very ascetic life, he wore one robe. He never wore slippers. The beauty around Swami was the inner beauty, which we all recognize. But through that, through that life of his, he was teaching us the opposite. If you flip the word Gita, Swami has himself said this, it becomes Tagi, which we would elaborate as Tyagi. Tyagi is sacrifice. So what Swami is expecting from us is sacrifice, and that is the Samam Bonam, that is the summary of the Gita. So even before we launch on studying, I'm not going to touch on the 700 verses, don't fear. But even before we go deeper into the Gita, all you need to hold on to is number one, the sacredness of the Gita, two, the sacredness of Sai, who wrote about the Gita at tremendous physical toil, and the third, that Gita stands for Tyag or sacrifice. What type of Tyag? Any type of Tyag. The Tyag or the sacrifice that you feel like making, the Tyag or the sacrifice that appeals to you. In spirituality, unlike in medicine or in engineering or in a career, things are not straitjacketed. Whatever comes from within, follow it, trust it, and make sure that you only use the touchstone. Is it good for the country? Is it good for people around you? Is it going to help you in your spiritual path? If it is, make that sacrifice if it appeals to you. That sacrifice could be a small thing like giving up something which you feel is not healthy or not healthy for your your strength of character. It could be stopping watching some serial or a television program that destabilizes you and sets you down a wrong path. Anything that you want. But as Sai devotees, Swami always said, more than dhyana and japa, I want you to do introspection, self-analysis, and that will lead us to identifying what should we do sacrifice of. So on this slide, you can see the number of different chapters. And again, we don't want to get flooded by information. The idea of listing the 18 chapters, which is a lot of information to consume, is for you to see how the Gita talks about a lot of different and key aspects that Swami has introduced to us to, and which are very pertinent to our everyday spiritual progress. It all starts with this doubt or self-doubt or depression in with respect to what we are doing. And what is that all about? That points to the fact that we are questioning. There is a spiritual hunger, and Swami has written a beautiful letter on spiritual hunger. So why is it important for us to examine these concepts and this concept of spiritual hunger or vishada, which means self-doubt? Why are we talking about it? Because you need to be aware that that is the origination, that is the starting point, the driver of your spiritual journey. Why did you come to Swami? Why did you may be making millions of dollars, you may be having so much property, healthy, happy life, plenty of leisure travel, everything is going good, and still we felt the need to seek the otherworldly uh, aspect of what life has to offer. Or you may have got hurt by life. You might be hit by disease or poverty or lack of progress, and then you turn to Swami. Nevertheless, that driver is important to recognize. So while you assimilate the names of the 18 chapters, I think it is fascinating that we're able to see the names of these 18 chapters. And I'll point you to chapter 12, which is the yoga of devotion. So there is a yoga. Yoga is not twisting the body and turning it in all kinds of shapes and exerting, difficult poses. But yoga means union. And you will see that all the 18 chapters start with the word yoga, yoga, yoga. Yoga is such an important concept because all through life, which we live in a fragmented way, what does yoga do? Yoga unites us. And that was Swami's life. Swami was united with everybody. Swami was universal. He was not fragmented in his vision, and it was natural for him. He didn't have to wake up in the morning and say, hey, you know what? Today I'm going to have a united vision. I'm going to have universal vision. No. it was not a concept for him. His vision was universal. He saw everything as part of himself and himself as part of everything. That's why he had no problems with anybody. The press would criticize him and he would say, Papam valaki telidu, he says. Just, I tell you, as a student, I saw this firsthand. We would be boiling as to what the press is taking as a misinterpretation. When Swami, I was in the hospital and uh, we did so many kidney transplants. And then they started writing that the hospital is, I don't want to say it in public forum, but wrong things are going on in the hospital. And we would laugh. I was in those operating rooms. And some people have a way of taking the wrong interpretation of everything good. And how Swami, but that's the beauty of Swami. He would say, why would anybody throw stones at a tree that doesn't have fruit? They will throw stones at the fruit bearing tree only. See how he would bring the sweetness out from a very tough situation. And he would say, just dismiss it and say, Papam vadaki telidu. Poor fellows, they don't know the love that you all have for me. So that yoga is that universal vision which has to come from within. And what do we have to do for it to come from within is allow it to come from within. Stop suppressing it. When good thoughts come, good feelings come, say, this is Sai arising with me. You don't have to clutter your head with ideas and push it into you. To let those are natural to us. So other things which I want to highlight here, and then we'll stop for questions. Look at what Mahatma Gandhi said. And it's important because why should you and I study the Gita? Einstein was greatly enamored of the Gita. And when such great people took to the Gita as the guiding light of their lives, so should we. So Mahatma Gandhi said, when doubts haunt me, when disappointments stare me in the face, and I see not one ray of hope on the horizon, I turn to the Bhagavad Gita and find a verse to comfort me. And I immediately begin to smile in the midst of overwhelming sorrow. Those who meditate on the Gita will derive fresh joy and new meanings from it every day. So that is the power of a sincere study of the Gita. And then this entire complex of the sadhana that the Gita talks about is directed at the clarification of the awareness of Atma and the fixing of attention on that. So that's how Swami has spoken at one point about the Gita. And then the other thing that is highlighted in the Gita is the soul migrates from body to body. Weapons cannot cleave it, nor fire consume it, nor water drench it, nor wind dry it. This is a famous quotation from the Gita, which tells us that all of us are much beyond what we imagine ourselves to be. From the time you are born, people tell you, no, 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 don't do this, don't do that. And then in school, you're further limited. And then in a career, in family life, you're further limited. But everybody is talking about the limitations of the body and the mind. Nobody is telling us that we are actually that Atma, that soul, which, if you read the spiritual literature, Sri Raman Maharishi has said that the Atma or the self is the size of the top of your thumb and it resides in the center of the chest. So, irrespective, there is evidence that life continues beyond the body. Nowadays, there's a lot of research going on. I can share some of that with you. Harvard, Yale, and a lot of the big institutes are doing research on the NDE, as it is called, near-death experience, and how that has lighted up certain sections of the brain, which are the same portions of the brain that light up in a very deep ecstatic spiritual experience that they've measured in, great monks. So there is evidence that this body is somehow connected with the soul, and that but what the Gita is telling us is that you have this vesture, or this overall garment that you have taken up, which you think about as yourself. And then there is this unseen tool within you which verbalizes, thinks, plan, and creates that inner chatter. But you are neither of those two. And that's a very, very, very beautiful thought. And so while I said that we should not dwell in concepts, why am I talking about these concepts? Because unless you start with these concepts, you are not going to even explore the feeling and the stirring that they will create within us. So these concepts are important, but we don't want to be stuck and limit to the concepts. We have to try to see what those concepts require us to do in terms of action. That is the beauty of what the Gita is telling us. Fire cannot consume it. When, as the Hindus, after death, you are on a pyre, the cremation ceremony. But the Gita is telling us, don't worry, your body is burning, but the fire is not going to consume it. Water, which you think is going to drench your body, cannot touch your soul. And why are we talking about this? Because it is not only about the fire and the water and the wind, it's also talking about all external events. And if you try to find out what is the difference between a realized soul, a jnani, and a non-realized soul, or a person who is not knowing that he's a he is the Atma. The difference is the dependency, the clinging of the non-realized soul. The feeling that I depend on, I need this. That is the difference between the jnani or the liberated soul who is free. Nothing else has changed. There is this famous Zen saying which says, before realization, mountains are mountains and rivers are rivers. After realization, mountains are mountains and rivers are rivers. The realization that Swami talks about here in this left corner of my slide, the awareness of the Atma, is not going to change my company, my family, my house, my property, my cars. It is going to change the fact that I don't depend on any of these things anymore. I may still continue to work, I may continue to live a family life, but I will not be dependent on it. And that is what this beautiful verse says. Weapons cannot cleave it, fire cannot consume it, wind cannot dry it. So let's try to think of that. And in this satsang, what is important is that that depth of these ideas, after we ingest those ideas, we have to try to drop the idea itself and then let the beauty of the idea, the subtle aspect of the idea, internalize and create the clarion call to action within. So I'll stop here today. We have 3 more sessions on the Gita. And what we'll do in the next few sessions is talk about other aspects. I'll just show you what I have coming up in the next slide, and I'll stop with this in exactly 1 minute. The 4 key players in the Gita, as Swami has described. I've taken all this from the Gita Vahini. On the top, you see Dhritarashtra, the blind emperor, and Sanjaya, the enlightened narrator of the Gita, who sitting in the court of Dhritarashtra is blessed with divine vision, is able to see this 2 armies with Arjuna and Krishna in the center, and Krishna and narrating to Arjuna, asking him to arise from the bondage and doubt of his Vishad. Vishad is the doubt, the self-doubt that has hit him. and how Krishna pulls him out. And at the bottom, you can see what Swami has said. Swami very beautifully narrated. Krishna first listens. Then he slowly comes up. He reminds Arjuna that he is not the body, that he is a Kshatriya, that he has to fight. Then he questions. And that's what Swami does to us. He questions us. He shakes our roots because he tells us that if you have to arise and come out of your limitation, he's going to question the very underlying thoughts that you have about your limitations. He's going to question those. And then he's going to challenge you to act. So this is what Swami says. Sri Krishna listens, reminds, questions, and challenges. How beautiful. And then finally, Krishna uses 4 words. Kasmalam, or ignorance, which he wants to eradicate. Anarya Justam, which is character that is harmful to the divine nature in us. Asvargyam, quality that destroys the divine in man. And akirtikaram, quality that causes the decline of wealth that is lasting, not physical wealth. So these 4 characters, Sri Krishna, the Lord, our Sai, Sanjaya, the Blessed One who narrates the whole unfolding of the Kurukshetra war, Dhritarashtra, who is greatly responsible for the war, and then Arjuna, who seeks that wisdom for continuing his life in a meaningful way. So we'll talk more about it. I'll open it up for questions, and thank you for bearing with me, listening to me, and I hope we've been able to communicate a little bit of that flavor of what happened there, because I heard it myself in the Bhajan Mandir in 1984, when all around Anandpur there was unrest and lot of civic unrest as there is today in the US. But at that time, Swami pulled our attention away and started this Gita discourses. And Al Drucker, who is a Westerner, lived in Colorado, he has also documented this. He has also recorded the Gita. And so I just wanted to give you that context, but now I'll open it up for questions, and let's talk.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Ravi. So if any of you have any questions, please put them in the chat so that we can see it. Ravi, I don't know if maybe someone already submitted questions to you privately. So maybe take a look
Okay.
chat and see.
I'm looking at the chat. I don't see anything there as yet.
No? Okay. I also don't see anything on my side. So if any of you have any questions, just to make the session a little bit more organized, please use the chat for questions. I guess that in the meantime, Ravi, I have a question for you. So it is very nice that you actually pointed out to chapter 12, because I have been fascinated by that particular chapter. It looks to me like it was a very dear chapter for Swami, because he actually dictated the English translation to Dr. John Hislop, and he asked him to memorize it. So can you tell us a little bit, maybe if you have any insights, why that particular chapter was so dear to Swami?
I don't actually know the exact details of what you found, but thank you for sharing that. That's very meaningful to us. But what I'll tell you, Jaime, is that when I look back at Swami's teaching and what he was trying to tell us, irrespective of whether he was talking about the Gita or the Bhaja Govindam or the Vedas, Swami's at the core of his message was bhakti. And I think bhakti is also very relevant when a master is physically present, when a master has physically called his disciples to his lotus feet and inspired them by his touch, by his physical presence, by his words. So without taking too much time, I want to just share that. I don't know the exact incident that you're mentioning, but it's fascinating to know that. But the only reason I can think of is that bhakti was very, very dear to Swami's heart. And every time he spoke about the Gopikas or Radha, who are also closely associated with Sri Krishna, his own eyes would light up. And I think he wanted to communicate to all of us that bhakti is the most important path. And if you also look at the details within chapter 12, Sri Krishna also uh, accepts that when Arjuna asks him that, okay, this knowledge of this yoga of knowledge, which is, the Gyan Marg, uh, if that is the fastest way to get to you, then why are you preaching karma, bhakti, and jnana, all three? And he says that bhakti, out of all the paths, bhakti is dearest to me, because with a mere offering, that famous verse is there, patram pushpa phalam toyam, with the mere offering of a small, it doesn't require anything elaborate to worship me, but through bhakti, you can attain me rapidly, O Arjuna. But I will try to find out more about that.
Awesome. Thank you, Ravi. So we got two more questions. I think that we have like 6 more minutes. So the first one is, often we are in the midst of action bound by ignorance, thinking we are right. We don't approach Swami for guidance before proceeding to the action. Will Swami interfering without our seeking to prevent a mishap? Guess that is the first question.
Okay, I don't see that question for some reason. I
It
see
was
Vinny's.
actually sent to me. Let me
Okay, okay.
just,
Can I request you to repeat it? I was just fumbling, trying to see where it was.
yeah, so let me actually just put it here and I
I'm
will
sorry, so sorry.
send it to you. Oh, hold on. So Ravi, okay. So here is the question.
Just reading it. Okay, okay. So I think to try to answer that, I don't mean to have the ability to necessarily give you a guidance on that, but I'll tell you my 2 cents. Uh, it is not possible, in my view, to forever be offering an action to Swami before we undertake that action, right? There are sometimes, let's say you're on the airport and you just landed, you have a connecting flight, and you see on the on the list of flights that you have to your plane is taking off, your next connection is taking off in minutes, and you have to run. I personally think it's not as if Swami is a judge who's sitting there waiting for us to fail. Swami is a teacher who's waiting for his students to pass the exam. He's not a judge sitting there and saying, oh, you didn't remember me, I'm going to punish you. No, that's not how it works. There are numerous incidents where Swami has intervened, saved people from big accidents, big calamities, and even everyday problems. So to me, what it seems is that we don't have to worry about, hey, did I do it in that particular action or not? Our relationship with Swami is very deep. And Swami is a very forgiving, very, we are doing this chanting every day now of the 108 names. And just before you complete the 108 names, you remind yourself that Om Shri Sai Sulabha Prasannaya Namaha. If God had been difficult to please, we would all be in trouble. But God is easy to please. God is waiting to come to our help. And I'll try to answer 2 questions with one. To Vinny's question, this verse of Vinny asked, in addition to what you asked, what is the verse of the Gita that we should, there are many verses, Mamayavam Shujiva Loke, there is this beautiful verse about Yogakshemam Vahamyaham, and we will talk about some of those. But to me, this was one of the most encouraging verses, which I think also answers the first question I was trying to respond to. Tad vidhi pranipatena pariprashnena sevaya. And I'll not read the rest of it. Learn the truth by approaching a spiritual master. Such an enlightened saint can impart knowledge unto you because he has seen the truth. So, to me, this is very important. Just find the master, which we have done. And as you see in this little picture here, you see that little boy clinging to Swami. We have to just cling to Swami. We found the master that the Gita is talking about. Now, in this verse 34 of chapter 4, all we have to do is uh, inquire from him directly, one on one, with reverence and service. Serve him. That service doesn't have to mean actually find Swami's feet or be disappointed that we don't have Swami's physical feet. Do mental puja. Swami told me personally once, हमको मानसिक पूजा बहुत अच्छा लगता है. Mental puja. Imagine his feet. Imagine that you're holding them in your lap. Uh, Caress those feet. Those tired feet, which I told you he had so much knee pain due to so many times getting in and out of the car. Imagine that. Press those feet and say, Swami, I'm giving your tired legs. You always walk to us. You're tired making that physical effort. I'm pressing those feet. That's all we need to do. And to Jaime's point about why bhakti was so dear to him, that's all we have to do. I'll try to also do justice to the other question. I think we have to not worry about getting into wrong action. If we are aligned with Swami, he will steer us, he will guide us. But I think what we have to remember as his devotees, what we have to remember as the few people on earth who were introduced to him one way or the other, is that he is with us. See, once when he was speaking about this common statement that he made, me intane, ventane, gentane, kantane, untanu, which means I am with you, in you, around you, above you, below you. And then once he added an additional guidance, and he said, Kani meer kuda atla yochan cheyali. You should also think like that. So what happens is, in the time of our trouble, and all troubles don't happen in a second. Some troubles are evolving, some troubles take years to manifest. What we have to do is forget about the trouble and cling to his lotus feet. And you will find, brothers and sisters, that that trouble is just flowing away, is just ebbing away. How it happens, how does he do it? You don't have to bother. Set your mind on him and remove that idea that you may take a wrong action. If you have that alignment, and it's a growing alignment, just like the problems are going to grow, the alignment also should grow. And by aligning with him, you will see the magical way in which he will envelop and overwhelm the problem and remove it from your consciousness. And you will wonder how you have become so free. And I've experienced that in my own life more recently. And then I have learned that don't think about the problem too much. This mentation, this inner argumentativeness, this thinking that my mind can solve all the problems, relinquish that control a little bit. I know it's very difficult for human beings to relinquish that control, but I tell you personally, we have that opportunity. And don't relinquish control to anybody else. And when I say anybody, I don't mean Swami as one more body. Relinquish our control to the Sai Avatar. Relinquish that, submit to the Sai Avatar. This is a very sacred thought. This is not a small thing that, oh, relinquish to Sai Avatar. No, this will not happen in minutes, in months. It will take time. But imagine the examples before us, John Hislop, Phyllis Crystal, as they relinquished their control to the Sai Avatar, they were able to do so much more than one individual could do. Phyllis Crystal could bring Swami into that plane where the hijackers had detonators tied to their own body. And that little lady, that's how she describes herself. She was afraid to talk to two people, and Swami made her lecture to 20,000. And look at what Swami can do, that divine energy, which took the form of Swami, that's a cosmic energy. So when we worry about these small actions going wrong and all that, believe me, and that's what Swami said, with one matchstick, you can light a forest fire. And Swami said, I will have many Vivekanandas. Who are those Vivekanandas in the Sai avatar? Who will change the course, guide people to change their lives. That is you and me. Through ordinary people, Sai will work. And it's not a revolution. It is a transformation. It's an inner transformation. Let me try to move to the next one. Often we are in the midst of action bound by ignorance, thinking we are right. We don't approach Sai. And that's the same question. I'm sorry. If there is one shloka that I tried to tell you, we will discover more shlokas. And then Hita sister says, let go ego and total surrender to Swami. True, that's exactly what it is. But it is going to happen slowly, and we have to give ourselves time. Let's not be harsh on ourselves. Let's not whip ourselves every day, because part of loving Swami is loving ourselves. Don't be harsh on yourself. Just forget about what you are today, how much you have progressed. Are you making good progress? That is, who that is talking? That is your mind talking. The mind wants to continuously overwhelm you by bringing to your consciousness the body and the mind itself. Instead of that, dump the thoughts about where you are, how well you're doing, and think about him. Think about this fascinating Sai who came into our life. And I'll tell you one secret. Swami often said, the women, and that's why he created this Ladies' Day celebration. It is to celebrate the feminine aspect of devotion. If you see the Radha, the Meera, the Shabari, they did not care about what the world thought of them. That comes very natural to the feminine aspect of our own personalities. That trust, that ability to weep, that ability to worship, that ability to submit to, Swami has himself said this. So, and that is bhakti. So we don't need to worry about where we are today, how we are doing, have we made spiritual progress. Just worship him. As you see in this little picture, hold on to him. I think our jobs are done. The master came into our lives. Now we have to just hold on to him. So with that, I'll stop before I make the organizers nervous. It's 12:06. I'll hand it back to Shubha or Jaime.
Awesome.
Thank you all for your time.
Awesome, Ravi. So what a wonderful session. I wanted to thank our guest speaker, Ravi Marivala. And also, I want to thank you all for joining this session today. We will continue next Saturday. And until then, please be safe. Jai Saram, everyone.
Sai Ram.
Saram.